Welcome to the sixth module for co-teaching within Durham Public Schools. This module will focus on monitoring student progress and measuring the effectiveness of your current co-teaching practices. Let's begin with some considerations for instruction. The pace for instruction should be brisk, and instructional practices can be varied by the use of assistive technology, instructional technology, projects, and/or flexible and creative lessons. Accommodations can include oral responses, audio access to instruction, or fewer items to complete. Those are just some examples. Teachers should avoid stigmatization of any one group by circulating students, maintaining heterogeneous groups, and using large and small group instruction based on student need and what's appropriate for the lesson or content being taught. Unobtrusive signals to communicate with one another should be created to address issues such as, okay, it's time to move on, or wait a minute, my group needs some extra time, if a teacher needs to leave in case of an emergency, or if teachers need to meet briefly to discuss something that's going on in the classroom. Teachers should develop signals to also indicate time for transitions, ways to gain attention, or ways to make an announcement. Since different learning needs require differentiated instruction, teachers in a co-taught classroom must know their learners' learning styles as well as their preferences. This knowledge is paired with a concern for each student so that instruction can be tailored to best meet each student's needs. Differentiation can occur in three areas. You can focus on the content, which is what is learned. It can be in the process, which is how the content is taught, and it can also differentiate based on the product, which is the outcome, how the learners will demonstrate their knowledge. Therefore, all teachers involved in co-teaching work together to make the appropriate adjustments to the content, the process, and/or product for all students within that classroom. Now, while it's generally understood that the classroom teacher has the most knowledge of the content, and the special education teacher has the most knowledge around making accommodations and specific skill-based strategies that may be appropriate, please note that these teachers should always work together and learn from each other's areas of expertise in order to accomplish the goal of differentiated quality instruction. Grading should ultimately reflect student learning. Purely averaging grades does not always reflect that, so teachers have two decisions to make when it comes to grading: what to grade and how to grade it. When you have two teachers involved in the grading process, there may be differing opinions around these two decisions that have to be made. So you may want to take time to discuss with your co-teaching partner, how do you grade? Do you grade homework? Do you give quizzes or tests, and how are they graded? Are they weighted in any particular manner? Do you consider anything about the student other than the actual grade when determining semester grades? Could you share grading? How could you ensure that grading practices are consistent across the content and the style? When having conversations around grading practices within your co-taught classrooms, please be sure to reference the Durham Public Schools grading procedures as well, and make sure that your practices and procedures are in line with the district's. When considering how to meet the needs of all students, co-teachers must be sure to establish a way to ensure quality instruction is taking place at all times. This needs to include, but may not be limited to, planning, delivering, and assessing the instruction. This is just another reminder that we want to move away from the idea and concept that these are my students in my class and those are your students that are in your class, and instead move to our students, and this is our class. And this concept is important throughout the co-teaching partnership, and it's very important to frequently revisit, evaluate, and reflect on. So let's talk about spending some time together for progress monitoring and assessment. Progress monitoring is a scientifically based practice that is used to assess students' academic performance and evaluate the effectiveness of instruction. Progress monitoring can be implemented with individual students or an entire class. To implement progress monitoring, the students' current levels of performance are determined and goals are identified for learning that will take place over time. The student's academic performance is measured on a regular basis, weekly or monthly. This can also be the case for a student's behavioral performance. Progress towards meeting the student's goals is measured by comparing the expected and the actual rates of learning. Based on these measurements, teaching is adjusted as needed. Thus, students' the student's progression of achievement is monitored and instructional techniques are adjusted to meet the individual student's learning needs. IEPs must reflect the supports and services a student with disabilities needs in order to achieve specific goals and/or objectives. In general, IEP goals are written to address the areas of need based on current functioning levels and the support needs of a student. Consider the following when developing IEPs for students who will be included in the general education settings. A goal should be written to address the deficit skills regardless of the classroom setting. These goals can be addressed by both the general and special education teacher in the co-taught classroom. If a student receives instruction only from a general education teacher, an IEP goal for the general education subject does not need to be written. However, when deficit skills impact performance across content areas, for example, if a student is functioning well below grade level, has failing grades, and is not passing the state assessment, the IEP team should consider goals to address those skill deficits. If the student receives services from a special education teacher in a co-taught classroom, that amount of time should be listed on the program services page of the IEP. As we near the end of these online modules, it's now time to talk about cleanup and reflection. As we reflect on our practices, we want to make sure that we're measuring the effectiveness of our effective planning. The effectiveness of implementation of co-teaching can also be assessed, and the effectiveness of co-teaching planning and implementation can be measured through self-assessment and reflection, as well as other tools. Teacher reflection is an integral aspect of teacher growth and can influence a team's adjustment made in the co-teaching process. Effective planning is essential to meeting the academic and behavioral needs for students. Teachers must design lessons which address the general goals and accommodations for all students in the classes. Teachers may also want to use planning checklists to assess their planning components and maybe even trade lesson plans with other co-teaching pairs or even teachers who are not providing instruction via the co-teaching model. And then you would want to adjust your planning based on the feedback from the checklist that you rated yourself on. Teachers also want to be sure that they're looking at the effectiveness of their implementation. And the way they can do this is they can get together with pairs and have utilize the co-teaching observation walkthrough form. Your EC facilitator as well as your coordinator and director may also walk through your classroom to conduct walkthroughs to provide feedback. Teachers are also encouraged to walk through and visit other co-taught classrooms to provide feedback to your colleagues within your building. Probably one of the most critical aspects of teacher growth is self-assessment and reflection. It influences adjustments that are made to the co-teaching process and creates a data collection process to assess what has occurred and sources of evidence are available. When conducting self-assessments and reflection, it is very, very important for teachers to be brutally honest with themselves and also to check with other co-teachers. When conducting a self-assessment, a teacher may just want to keep that self-assessment information to herself or himself, or they may want to share with their mentor within the school or their EC facilitator or maybe another colleague to look for areas of improvement. So reflect on your current co-teaching situation. And pause the video for a moment to reflect on the following questions. Again, pause the video and take some time to reflect on and discuss the outcomes of co-teaching with your co-teaching partner. And lastly, we've come to the conclusion of all of our modules for co-teaching within Durham Public Schools. Please take the time to reflect and answer the following. Please identify 3 things you learned from these modules, list 2 points that were clarified, and then ask 1 question that still remains. Thank you again for your participation in these online modules.